if you're new, my name is Landry, and I started a series on my channel where each and every week I talk all things best medicine. If you're not familiar with what best medicine is, it is a American adaptation / spinoff of a beloved British TV series that was on the air for over 18 years called Doc Martin. It concluded in 2022 after 10 successful series when they decided that it was time to bring the lovely show to an end. I did not come across Doc Martin until 2024, but immediately became a huge super fan, so to speak. And when I found out Best Medicine was going to be made, I was super excited, and I wanted to make a little series where I talk all things Best Medicine each and every week, share my thoughts, and compare it to the original Doc Martin. So yeah, I can't believe we're already to the episode 10 of season 1. It's crazy. Feels like time has flown by. I remember when starting out this series, watching, I couldn't wait for the next episode, and now I feel like it's going by way too fast. But yeah, let's talk about episode 10 of season 1 of Best Medicine, and it was titled Port Winnings and a Funeral. A lot happened this week. I have mixed emotions, I will say. As a Best Medicine fan, I feel like this was one of the best episodes, no pun intended. And as a Doc Martin fan, I have a little bit mixed opinions about the episode. So, that's all I'll say for now. Let's dig into it. I do want to say, if you have not watched Best Medicine yet, and you are planning on watching it, or you haven't seen the recent episode, you may not want to watch this video until after seeing, because there will be spoilers. I dig into this really deep. And if you are curious to see my series, I have a playlist on my channel where you can start from the beginning as we have led up to this moment. So yeah, if you've watched Best Medicine and you're curious what my thoughts are, come on, let's talk about it. First of all, I feel like we need to do a little recap of last week's episode. Episode 9 was a big episode to the season. We had Martin's parents come to town, which was a huge deal. We got to see and meet his parents and kind of realize, okay, maybe this is why Martin is the way he is. So, in last week's episode, not only did we meet the parents, but we saw that Martin, Dr. Best, was really trying to work on his blood phobia. He was putting blood vials in his cabinets just all over his house, and he was trying to expose himself to it. But still, it's not working. His blood phobia is getting worse, or staying the same. He's nauseous when he sees blood, and it's really bothering him because he wants to get over this. Robert, Dr. Best's father, Dr. Robert Best, and his mother Vanessa makes an unexpected visit. And you know, they're kind of giving him a hard time, don't really know why he moved to Port Wynn to become a general practitioner rather than being a successful heart surgeon like he was in Boston. They're confused by he would leave that successful occupation. And the real reason they are there is Robert wants to sell the house that Aunt Sarah's living in because he's the oldest and it was left to him. And he told Aunt Sarah that he's going to sell the house. And all this time we find out that Robert has a gambling problem. So that's why he has these behaviors he is having. Martin's mother Vanessa had no clue, so that was a wild thing. We saw that the blood phobia really does need to get under control for Martin because Sheriff Mark at the sleep-in at the school ends up having a terrible accident, gets impaled by a wire, and has abdominal bleeding. And if it wasn't for Martin's father Robert being the specialist for stomachs, I can't think of the name, starts with a GI doctor, it probably wouldn't have went well because Martin had to immediately run out when he saw blood. And Louise is like, hey, we need to get this under control. So yeah, I think that's a good context of what happened last week to get into this week's episode. So let's talk about episode 10. So first of all, I want to give huge credits to the people the videographers, the drone operators, just the scenes opening up right away. Those beautiful drone shots of Port Wynn, Maine, was just so beautiful. We saw the birds, which is the main theme of this week's episode, just the fall colors in general. They just do a phenomenal job capturing the scenic beauty of the town. And I just, every week, as a photographer, I just admire that. But I don't think I give them credit enough, so I wanted to mention that. So first of all, we start out at the school, and that's when we're getting the knowledge that this episode is going to be about birds, because Louise is in her classroom. She's talking about how Port Wynne is famous for the pattern of the birds migrating, and every year they have a time where they go bird watching, pretty much. And Peter Kronk is one of the main regular characters, and you see him getting up, and you hear Louisa saying, "Peter, the bell hasn't rung yet. It's to release you." And Peter says, "Oh, I know. I'm letting myself out early. I have an appointment." So right away, there's something going on with Peter Kronk. I thought it was funny that he's independent at his young age, and he didn't find anything wrong with checking himself out of class. So while we're at the school, we have Dr. Best and Martin in his office trying to put a needle in Elaine's arm to take blood. You can tell that he is still determined to maintain his blood phobia issues. He's trying to improve. He doesn't want to be afraid of blood anymore. And Elaine's like, you got this, just don't look down, just don't look down. What's he do? He looks down and then immediately gets nauseous. And he just immediately gets frustrated, and he's like, this is the 4th time, it's no use. So you can tell he's really getting frustrated with himself. He knows that he's struggling and it's just bothering him, and they get interrupted by Peter Kronk. So it seems like Peter Kronk has the same symptoms that I have, I'm not gonna lie. If I immediately start to feel like sick or something, and I want to know what's wrong with me, I will immediately go to Google and Google my symptoms. And speaking as a person that does that quite frequently, I don't recommend it, because Google will tell you that you're dying at all costs. That'll be the number one thing. It'll be like, you're dying, or you have cancer. And then for me, I immediately start panicking, knowing good and well that that is probably not the case whatsoever. So I can relate to Peter Kronk. So apparently he's been coming to the doctor's office quite frequently, and he thinks that he has all of these different diseases and sicknesses and just everything under the shining sun. He thinks he has heart failure. He thought he had a collapsed lung at one point. And Dr. Best Martin is like, Peter, we've been over this. You do not have anything wrong with you. You are perfectly healthy. And, Peter was like, as an intelligent boy he is, he's like, well, how do we know? I think I might have this. And, Martin immediately is like, no, we're not doing this. You're a hypochondriac. And Peter's like, what does that mean? He means, you are obsessed with things that are not wrong with you. You keep looking these things up on the internet. You need to stop. And he immediately tells Peter bye. So yeah, right away I was like, yeah, I'm the Peter Kronk. I'm guilty for looking up my symptoms and thinking I have something bizarre when I don't have it whatsoever. So we meet this interesting character now. They're sisters, the Kloof sisters, and we happen to have Agnes being the patient this go round. And I loved Martin's reaction, because this Agnes woman was something else. She's like introducing herself and that she had an appointment at 1 o'clock and it's 1:02 now, so she doesn't want to keep him waiting. Let's do this. I'll show myself in. And I'm like, okay. And then you have the other sister that is nothing like her. She's kind of not calm and collected. I don't know. She's just snacking on crackers. And I love the doc's response to Elaine. Remark, Dr. Best, who's that bundle of scarves? And that was just so funny when Dr. Best said to Elaine, who's that bundle of scarves? And Elaine's like, oh, that's just Agnes Kloof. She's a sweet little lady, and I really like her, and she's in the in the examination room, and she's like, I'm ready for you, doc. And he's like, okay, let's just get this over with. So this lady has stomach pains, and the doc is concerned, and he's telling her, he examined her, and he's like, you need to like come back. If the pains get worse, we need to run some tests. And she's like, okay. And then immediately she starts talking about the bird watching and said how she can't miss this. She goes every year and that she really enjoys it, and asks Martin if he's ever been, and he's like, only as a child. And she's like, well, and he's like, she's like, well, it's something you don't want to miss. And he's like, well, I just got a pair of new binoculars. And then immediately she goes and changes the subject. She's like, so, does our bachelor doctor have a woman, a lover in his life? Because it's not perfect to see the birds without being with your lover. And, you know, Martin's getting uncomfortable, and he's like, okay, no time, I have other patients. Like, he's like, can we not do this? Like, let's stop. No thanks for coming in, but I'm done, let's move on. So that was a character, I will say. And the fact that there is bird watching and she's excited to see the golden winged warbler is pretty cool, because I, as a photographer, love to take pictures of birds. So I was really excited about this episode, seeing what this is about. So while the doc is dealing with Agnes and her sister as they are leaving, we have another patient, and I do not think they said their name, but they came up to Elaine and asked her what kind of show she is doing in the waiting room today. And Elaine told him that she is not going to do one, that why do it? It's a bunch of garbage. Why would she want to fill the world with garbage? So you can tell that she's really been thinking about what Vanessa said to her last week about what does she want to do with her life? Does she want to be a garbage person filling the world with garbage? And you can tell that it's affecting her, and she's kind of guessing about doing these shows. And meanwhile, as Agnes and her sister I don't even know how to say her sister's name, Maleficent or something like that, are leaving. As they are leaving, Agnes comes back in and starts shooing away the birds, and says, silly Dr. Reese and his birds. And what cracked me up is immediately Martin, Dr. Best, knows there's something wrong, and he looks at Elaine and says, did you just see that? And I'm like, laughing. I'm like, Doc, why are you asking Elaine if she saw it? Elaine does not pay attention whatsoever. So, like, even if she was, she wouldn't have caught that. Like, I just thought that was so funny that he thought that she saw what he saw. But anyway, knowing Martin, he knows there's something off, and he is going to investigate. So now we have the big plot of the bird watching, and you know, Martin had told Agnes that he had gotten a new pair of binoculars, and I really enjoyed this scene between Martin and Louisa. So Martin's outside trying out his new binoculars, looking at the birds, and he kind of turns to the side, and Louisa's also doing the same thing. And immediately, you know, he kind of waves at her, which kind of makes me giggle, because just the interaction between the two of them, it just makes you I don't know, I just have all these feelings about their relationship growing. And so he walks over and they start talking, and he's like, I just got a new pair of binoculars, and they kind of have an awkward conversation, you know how they are. Never can really say the right words to one another. And Martin asks Louisa if she's going to go see the birds, and where's she going to go see the birds. And Louisa's like, well, I usually go to the cliff. We usually take the Kloof sisters, Mark and I, but no Mark. And so I'm going to do it different this year. And immediately Martin's like, oh, well, we could. And then she's like, well, if you wanted to. And he's like, yeah, why not? So basically they couldn't find the words to ask one another if they wanted to go together. And so finally they say they'll go together. Martin's like, is tomorrow morning, Saturday, okay? 8 o'clock. And Louisa's like, sounds good. Martin's like, I'll pick you up. And this is what cracked me up. He says, how does he say it? Okay, she says, in your car? He says, not with my arms. And I just started laughing, and you could tell it's like they know that that was awkward. And then they're talking about having a picnic, and she's like, I'll bring something. He said, I'll bring something to drink. And she says, I'll bring sandwiches. And then that was that, and Martin's like, okay. I think he's like, okay, well, that went well. May have said some things, silly things, but it's a date. Or he doesn't call it a date. He thinks it's just an outing with Louisa, but we all know it's a date. It's a date. So I was really looking forward to that. Martin didn't say anything dumb to offend Louisa. He was awkward, but she was just as awkward. And I was like, good, we're gonna get to see Martin and Louisa time. Boy, was I wrong, because Peter Kronk is with them on this bird watching hike. And you can tell Martin's annoyed, because he's like, you're telling me that his mom had to work and she couldn't take him? And Louisa's like, yes, I know, but she was very convincing that if Peter didn't get to go see the birds, then he would be devastated, and we can't have that. So Peter is with them on this hike, and Peter is talking nonstop about him having this medical condition, and that medical condition, and this medical condition. And I can't remember what he said he had, but it cracked me up, because Martin's like, oh, really? That's kind of hard to get, because it's only found in dogs. And Peter's like, well, I couldn't be for sure. And so, poor old Peter Kronk, he just thinks he has all of these different symptoms and diseases and conditions, and Martin's kind of getting annoyed now, as I would too, I guess. But like I said, I am the Peter Kronk in this situation. So if things don't get any better, we also have the Kloof sisters and Aunt Sarah walking to see the birds, and they run into Martin and Louisa and Peter, and immediately they're like, ooh, more people! This is good! And Martin's like, no, this isn't good. Like, he just wanted to be with Louisa, I think. He was excited about having a long time with Louisa, and now they are more people joining the party than what he wanted. So Aunt Sarah, they're like talking about how Aunt Sarah was so kind to join them and take them on this walk. It's an annual tradition, and just talking about it. And I loved it so you had Agnes talking to Peter, and Peter, that was another thing. It was so funny. Peter introduced himself with this, I have this condition, and Martin's like, no you don't, and Peter kind of looks at him like, fine, whatever. That was just so funny, just the little details. So you have Agnes and Peter talking to one another, and Louisa and the other sister are walking, and then you have this moment between Martin and Aunt Sarah. And Aunt Sarah says to Martin, are you on a date? And Martin's like, no, we're just walking to the woods. We have decided to have a picnic. She brought the sandwiches, and I brought the beverages. And Aunt Sarah says, so that's good. So you're on a date then? And Martin kind of shakes his head. I'm like, Martin, whatever you think, this is a date. Let's just be honest. You have feelings for Louisa. This is a date. Just admit it already. So we finally get to the place where the bird watching is, the cliff, and a lot of things happened in this scene. First of all, you have Peter Kronk immediately says he has to go to the bathroom, and Martin's shaking his head, and Louisa's like, well, just go in the woods, it'll be fine, just go where nobody can see you. And then you have the sister drinking the herbal tea, which she asks Aunt Sarah if she wants some, and Aunt Sarah's like, no thank you, I don't drink earth, which I thought was funny. And then you have Agnes, the main sister, the one that had the stomach pains, which she started hallucinating on the trail as they're walking, and Martin's like, this is not normal, I need you to come in for tests, we need to do some tests. And she's like, oh, I'll be fine, I'm just drinking my natural herbal tea, that's my secret for staying healthy and young. So I was like, okay. So we're at the cliff looking at the birds. We see the golden winged warbler, which was a beautiful bird, by the way. And Agnes starts singing, which I was like, okay. And that was another thing, Aunt Sarah doesn't really seem like she's really happy to be with these, taking them after all, because she makes the remark, it's getting kind of late, why don't we head back? And that's when Agnes starts singing. And next thing I know, and I don't know if it was just me, but I was just in shock, couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. Agnes starts singing to the birds, and she doesn't run, she doesn't walk, she kind of acts like she's flying and flies off the cliff. And I think I was just as shocked as Martin and Louisa, just everyone there. And I was like, what just happened? Like, what just happened? I was just in so much shock. And I'm like, is she okay? And I was just like, I couldn't believe what I had just watched. And then to make things even better, Peter Cronk comes back and says, I think my pee is orange. Does that mean I have an obstructive bowel? And I'm like, there's just too much going on. Like, this lady just flew off the cliff, and Peter's worried about his pee, and I'm like, oh, what is going on? I just didn't know how to respond to that scene. I was just in shock. As much as Martin was, I think. So now we have, went back to the doctor's office after that shocking moment of Agnes flying to her death. I don't even know I think that's an understatement. I don't know what happened. But Martin and Mark are talking, and Mark has the death certificate, and he wants Martin to sign it. And immediately Martin's not buying it. He says, I don't believe it was an accident. I think that woman did it. Like, she didn't know she did it. She was delusional, and she didn't run off the cliff, like, intentionally. She flew off that cliff. And Mark's like, well, I hate when, I don't know, but I need you to sign the certificate. And Martin's like, I'm not signing it until I find out what's truly wrong. Something happened. You know how Martin, Dr. Best is. If there's something wrong and it needs to be solved, he's going to be the one to solve it. And I liked the moment when Mark said, oh, I understand. You need a hug before you can sign it. And Martin, I will never need a hug. And then Mark's like, now I feel like you really need a hug. And I was like, Martin, everyone needs a hug. Like, please, I know you might not want it to be Mark, but everyone needs a hug in their life, is how I felt when he was saying that. And so we go back to, we now have the will reading at the Salty Breeze for Agnes. And immediately Martin wants to find the sister because he has questions. He wants to do an autopsy of the body of her sister's body, Agnes. He really believes there was something far worse that caused her to have the accident, and he wants to figure it out. But he goes to find Aunt Sarah to ask her if she knows where the sister is, and Aunt Sarah is kind of like all to herself. And immediately, I thought this was sweet, Martin says, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. They really, they were like close friends to you. How is this making you feel? And I did not in a million years think that Aunt Sarah would say this. I mean, I kind of got the impression that Aunt Sarah was a little annoyed because she made the comment of wanting to leave. It's getting late. But I didn't realize she was this annoyed. So apparently Aunt Sarah did not want to take these two ladies on the bird walking adventure. Aunt Sarah was just being a loving, kind neighbor of the community. And she had taken the sisters, groceries one day. And when she did that, it was a huge mistake because now she has become like a servant to them, where she is literally doing everything for them. And she's sick and tired of it. And she's annoyed by them. And she was just going on and on about how they were mean people, how one time Agnes didn't like the way she cooked her eggs and she spit them in her hair. And she's just like going on and on about how she's tired of it. And then she says, which this is even cold for Aunt Sarah. I couldn't believe she said this. She said, "Now I'm just waiting for the other one to go. I see starvation in the future. Maybe she will starve and be gone by Christmas." And even Martin's like, I don't know what to say about this. And I can't remember the exact lines between each other. I think he says, "I'm appalled by this," and Aunt Sarah says, "You and me both, sister." And then she's like, "Come on, let's go in, let's get this thing over with." So obviously Aunt Sarah is not a fond fan of the two sisters due to the fact that she's been helping, doing things, begging at their ever beck and call, just everything under the shining sun. So we start doing the reading, and immediately Martin wants to go talk to the sister, and Aunt Sarah's like, "No, you're not. You can wait until the end. You're coming to sit with me." And then Aunt Sarah is very opinionated, which we already knew. But there was the people talking about how they couldn't believe that she's gone, and Aunt Sarah's, "I can." And Martin's like, "You need to control yourself. Keep your thoughts to yourself. There's a time and place when to say." And Aunt Sarah's like, "I'm sorry, but I needed to vent." So clearly you can tell that Aunt Sarah's not happy. And how ironic that whenever they start reading the will, it was Greg and George. And Greg was like, "I have been left the papers to read." And then it says, "The person that is important in my life will be the one to read the papers, and that is Sarah Best." And so, Aunt Sarah's like, I'm not doing it. And Martin's like, "Come on, Sarah, just do it." So she goes up there and she reads the papers. And you can tell that even, when she's reading the will, that, these people were characters, because in the will itself, Agnes writes down that Sarah needs to speak up and pronunciate her words, which, it's like, wow. I guess we're getting a sense of the characters of these ladies. And Aunt Sarah's reading, and it turns out there's going to be this big event, and that Aunt Sarah is in charge of organizing these events that are going to take place before the funeral. Then you have that the big main thing on the list of being given away is the Cluth mansion once the sister has died as well. And it said that this mansion is going to be left to the person that is the backbone of the community, somebody that's been there for them from day one. And she's just reading, and I'm thinking, oh, how nice, they're going to leave the mansion to the Aunt Sarah. I mean, that makes sense, with the situation that's going on in Sarah's life. But no, they're leaving the mansion to Clark. They're, the person that maintains the grounds. His name was Clark Flanagan, and that's who they left the house to. And immediately, Aunt Sarah's in shock. And she's like, "Well, congratulations, Clark." And then they were going to have meditations by the water. That was the thing. And she's found out as she's reading this that she is in charge of making the floral head arrangements, or headdresses, and cornbread for the whole entire town for one of the things. So, Aunt Sarah is venting. She's fuming because she didn't get left the mansion, and she's in charge of, putting this whole funeral thing together. And she's like, I can't. I'm done with these people. So, immediately, Martin, Dr. Best, is going to go once again try to talk to the sister, but Greg and George stops him and is like, "Hey, you're going to need to be going to this event at the beach, the shore. The last time we had a water calming ceremony, people nearly drowned and had hypothermia." So poor old Martin, he's getting roped into something he didn't really want to do, it doesn't sound like. And even Aunt Sarah's like, "Okay, if I'm going to have to go to this, you're going with me." So he hasn't got to talk to the sister yet. So now we didn't get to see the ceremony at the water, which I'm kind of interested in what that may have been, because it sounded interesting. It is Portland. But we see that Martin, Dr. Best, is now at the pharmacy talking to Sally, and the exchange between the two. Sally immediately realizes he's wet, and she says, "You're wet." And he's like, yeah, I had to play lifeguard. I've been playing lifeguard down at the shore because people don't know how to swim. And she's like, well, we could fix that. You could, she's like, you could undress. And he's like, no, not doing it. And she's like, you're looking for a good time. And I'm like, no, he's not. He's not interested in you. You need to quit flirting with him. Like, he's not interested in you. And he's like, okay, the real reason I'm here is I want to know about Agnes's medicine that she had when she had a urinary tract infection. And, Sally's like, okay, fine. So she looks it up, and it turns out that Agnes did not come and pick up her prescription. So now the doc is thinking that maybe an untreated urinary tract infection caused the symptoms of being delirious, not knowing, and confusion in your surroundings. And Sally, as he's leaving, he's like, I'm gone, because he asks her where the Kloof house is, because he needs to talk to the sister immediately. And Sally's like, well, she won't be there. She's at the Salty Breeze for the next funeral program. And he's like, oh, okay. And we can go together. And he's like, nope, I'm gone, goodbye. And he walks out. And she's like, he enjoys it. And I'm like, he doesn't enjoy it. He has no interest in you whatsoever, Sally. Just stop. So we get to the Salty Breeze to see what this first funeral event is. It was interesting. It was a poetry reading. And right away you had Peter Kronk on the porch, and he stops the doc, and he tells Martin that, you remember how my pee was orange? Well, now I think it's brown, and I think I may have uterine cancer. ChatGPT told me. And Martin's like, well, that would be kind of hard for you to get, considering you don't have a uterus. And I was like, laughing. I was like, bless his heart. Then he's like, so we can rule out cancer or some kind of cancer, so we can rule out pregnancy. And Martin's like, yes, we can rule out pregnancy. Like, you're not going to be able to get that. And he's like, but if you're really concerned, as it sounds, you need to come in and give me a urine sample, because it could be something, but not like that serious. And so poor old Peter Kronk is still looking up his symptoms, but it does sound like he really does have something going on. We just don't know what yet. So we go into the Salty Breeze where the funeral poetry reading is going on. And you have Greg at the door, and Greg's crying. He's like, isn't this incredibly moving? And Martin's just standing there, and he's like, I think it speaks for itself. I don't know, it was just, this whole scene of the poetry was just cracking me up, and I just couldn't help but laugh, because it was an interesting sight. So you have Elaine reading one of Agnes's famous poems, and it was something else. And I liked when she gets done reading, and Aunt Sarah's like, thank you for that beautiful reading of whatever that was. Because it's like, nobody knew what that was about. It was crazy. And she's like, okay, cornbread. I have cornbread if you want to stay for refreshments. The poetry reading is over with. And then she goes up to Martin. She's like, please just get me out of my misery. He's just shaking his head. And then Elaine even comes up to Martin, and she's like, what am I going to dedicate my life to? How am I going to lift up people's souls? And because she's just fascinated by the poetry reading that Agnes had wrote, and Martin says, hopefully not reading any more poetry. In other words, that was awful. I don't think it was Elaine's fault. I think it was the poem writer. But yeah, that was something else. And so finally Martin gets to talk to the sister, Maleficent, or I think that's how you say her name. And he's talking to her and asks her if it would be okay if he did a autopsy on her sister. He thinks that there could be some underlying causes that caused her to have the episode that she had, that he thinks that an untreated urinary tract infection caused her to have suffered from psychosis, and that may have caused the accident. And Maleficent's like, well, my sister has been cremated now. She is off with the birds, flying in another plane. And she's like, it's for the best. And Martin's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had already went through with this. And she's like, yeah, it's for the best. And as she's leaving, she starts hallucinating seeing birds. And I found it funny that Clark looks at him and says, crazy old bat, how much longer do you think she will last, Doc? So everybody's like wanting to know how long the other sister will live. Martin's just looking like, really? That's what you're asking me? And he's like really concerned. So clearly something is going on, because it wasn't just the one sister. The other one is experiencing the same delusions as the first one. So I'm like, okay, something clearly is going on. So we go back to the doctor's office, and you have Martin examining the other sister, and she has had some abdominal pains as well. And, she's holding her stomach, and she's talking about, she makes the comment, now that my sister's gone, I have you all to myself, which I thought was very interesting. And he's like, not buying it. He's like, he didn't say a word to that comment. And she starts holding her stomach, and he's like, oh, do you have stomach pains? And she's like, yes. Well, no. Well, yes, I do, but no, I don't. And I'm like, huh? There can't be yes, and it can't be no. Like, what's going on? And she starts drinking her herbal tea and says that this will make me feel better. And immediately he's like, okay, what's in this? And she's like, oh, we go out mushroom hunting, and we make our own tea, brew our own tea using the mushrooms. So immediately that's a red flag that maybe they're using poisonous mushrooms. And so he immediately tells Elaine that she needs to take the sister home to the Kloof's mansion, needs to stay with her, and that he will be back. He had called the lab to run analysis on the tea that they are making, and that it was urgent, that they needed to do it right away. And Elaine's like, so why am I doing this? And he's like, well, but she is experiencing the same symptoms as her sister was, the delusions, and I just don't want anything bad to happen. She can't be by herself, or it will end like it did with the other sister. So as Elaine is doing that, you have Martin going hunting in the woods, and I didn't think in a million years he would take Mark with him, Sheriff Mark, but he is. And it was so funny between the two. They're just talking, and Mark is like, I love this, Doc, getting the team back together again on a manhunt. And the Doc's like, we're hunting mushrooms, not a man. And it was just so funny. Mark is just excited because him and his best bud are getting together hunting. And the fact that even Mark said this, the only, on your he says, oh, you mushroom under that log, you come out with your stems up. I mean, Sheriff Mark is just a goofy character, but I did get to laughing at these little comments. And immediately Mark is talking to Martin, and he's like, I can't believe that you didn't invite Louisa. You should have invited Louisa to come with us. She knows a lot of things. She knows a lot about mushrooms and other things. She knows about science. She knows about reading. She's good with kids and other stuff. And, but you know what? I'm glad it's just the two of us. We don't need her. We're not going to be lonely forever. And, it's like, okay, Mark, stop talking, but I'm glad that you're enjoying your time with Martin. I don't know if Dr. Best is enjoying his time with you. He's just hunting for mushrooms, but hey. At least he invited you, I guess, this time. And immediately, as they are on their hunt, they run into Clark. And he's like, has a shotgun, and he's like, you're trespassing. And Martin's like, well, one day this land will all be yours. And Clark is like, we'll see about that. And I was kind of creeped out about this Clark guy, because it seemed like something was up, but I couldn't pinpoint what was up. And immediately he's like, you need to go, Sheriff Mark's like, we're mushroom hunting. And he's like, you need to go on that trail. And Mark was like, yeah, I knew that. So that was very wild. Maybe coincidental, I don't know, but it was just very interesting. So it looks like Dr. Best, Martin took Sheriff Mark's advice and ends up asking Louisa for help because they are in his office looking at all the mushrooms that they had collected. And it looks like all the mushrooms are harmless. None of them are poisonous or could cause any harm because Louisa's like, yeah, I cook with all of these and they're okay. And immediately they have another moment because they're talking about how it's a shame they couldn't get together with the circumstances. They couldn't have their picnic, and Martin's like, yeah, it is. And Louisa's like, I even made a meatloaf with some of these mushrooms. And he's like, a meatloaf? And she's like, yeah, I know it wasn't fancy. It wasn't supposed to be fancy, but yeah, I made a meatloaf. And he's like, well, I made lemonade with fresh lemons. And he's like, I had a little bottle and it was in my pocket, my coat pocket. And they're like, yeah. And it's just like, they're having that moment, but it's still awkward. And they're both like, well, we could, get back. We could get together. And like, yeah, we could. And then they get interrupted because Sheriff Mark is knocking on the door. And he wants to get together with Martin, Dr. Best, and drink some coffee and discuss bud things. And immediately he sees that Louisa is there, and he's kind of like, oh, Louisa, because you can tell that it's still kind of awkward between them two. And Martin's like, yeah, I took your advice and asked Louisa for help with the mushrooms. And now this is going on. Elaine comes in with terrible stomach pains, and she's asking the doc if he has some Pepto and some aspirin or something like that. And he's like, well, you're supposed to be with the Kloof sister. And she's like, well, somebody else is going to have to be because I'm in pain. And he's like, wait, what? She's like, stomach pain, my stomach's killing me. And immediately you can tell that something is not right. So he immediately calls the lab. And turns out Elaine had been drinking some of that herbal tea as well. And so it turns out, as Martin's calling the lab, the herbal tea comes back with nothing wrong with it, but that the sister's blood test came back with significant levels of arsenic. Which immediately Martin goes running towards Elaine and smacks the bottle out of her hand, and everybody's like, wait, what's going on? And he's like, arsenic poisoning. And they're like, thinking that it's the tea, and Louisa's like, well, wait a second, if the mushrooms aren't poisonous, it can't be the tea, right? And Martin's like, well, unless somebody's putting something in the drinks. And immediately Mark's like, so it is a manhunt. And the fact he says, it is a manhunt, Doc. I should have had worn my other pants. And I'm like, oh, snap. So, things are escalating quickly because Elaine tells them that, Clark, because Sheriff Mark thinks it's Clark and says his motive is he, is inheriting the house, so he's probably trying to get rid of the other sister so he can have the house. And, Elaine's like, no, not Clark, he's sweet, and he's out right now taking Peter on a walk. And immediately Louisa's like, Peter Kronk, what's he doing there? So clearly things are escalating quickly, and it turns out while Martin's on the phone, Elaine is telling Louisa and Mark about how the Kloof's house has a giant leak in the roof, and that it's been leaking since the last big rainstorm, and couldn't believe it, and that's sad that they're living like that. And so a lot was going on, and so they're immediately running to go to the house because they think that Clark is going to poison Peter and whoever else that may be there. And Aunt Sarah is walking in as all of this chaos is erupting, and she needs medicine because she needs a muscle relaxer because her hand's cramping from making all the funeral programs. And Martin's like, no time, we gotta go to the Kloof's house, I need you to stay with Elaine and make sure she drinks plenty of water. And Aunt Sarah's like, what is going on? And it's like, Sheriff Mark's like, possible poisoning attempt of arsenic poisoning, somebody's trying to kill the sister. And it was so funny, but not funny, when Aunt Sarah just has like a smile on her face and she says, oh really? And immediately I'm like, what in the world is going on? I didn't think that Aunt Sarah had it in her. I don't think she would ever harm a soul. But that was like really good on the writers doing that, because it made it look like that Aunt Sarah may have a motive. And after episode 8, the Bog Man, and the whole storyline behind that, it wouldn't put me nothing would surprise me. Let's just put it that way. So we make it to the Kloof's mansion, and a lot is going on. Peter's on the porch, and he's just holding his stomach, and he's talking about how he's in so much pain, and Louise is like worried about him. And immediately Sheriff Marks tells Clark to stay away. Why are you trying to poison these people? And Clark's like, I'm not trying to poison a single soul. And it turns out that Clark ends up watching Peter on those days when his mom's at work. So it wasn't out of the ordinary that Peter was with Clark. And so immediately Sheriff Mark and Dr. Best Martin are going in the house looking for the sister, because Clark says that woman is crazy. She's out of her mind. And you hear the woman just like making bird noises, and and the scene between Mark and Martin, Sheriff Mark's like, I'm going to do this perimeter, you need to do this. And Martin's like, I know what a perimeter sweep is. So he goes upstairs, and immediately you see that the wallpaper is peeling off of the walls because of that water damage. And he immediately says, it's the wallpaper. It's the wallpaper. It's an old house. Arsenic was in the wallpaper. That's what it is. And then the woman comes to him, and she's like, Dr. Best, you're here. You came for me. And he's like, I came for your health and safety. I'm not here for you. You have serious arsenic levels in your blood. We need to get you out of here. So all this time, it turns out that the wallpaper, because it's an old house, was causing them to get delusional. And over time, it just kept getting worse and worse, and that the stomach pains explained everything. But then, as he's explaining this to them and the ambulance gets there, Clark has a look on his face, and Martin's like explaining, about the house. And Clark's like, wait a second, but Peter, the boy never went in the house. And Peter's just in pain, talking to Louisa, says he has shoulder tip pain. And so Martin realizes, Dr. Best realizes, it's more than just stomach pains. And so immediately he realizes there's something wrong with Peter's spleen. And a whole transition thing, because they only called for one ambulance. So he asks Mark to transport the Kloof sister in his car, because Peter needed the ambulance. And the sister gets spooked, knocks Peter over, which causes the spleen to burst, which causes an even more serious scene. So they're in the back of the ambulance, and Louisa's panicking. Peter went unconscious, and he's woken up, and he wants to know where he is. And Louisa's telling him that he's in the ambulance, and Martin thinks that he has a ruptured spleen, and things are just getting worse. And not to mention, you have that EMT trainee just, not making the situation any better. He's like, yeah, I've seen this before. Kids fall down, but they'll get up. It's okay. And, Louisa kind of gets annoyed, and she's like, so are you a doctor? And he's like, no, I'm an EMT trainee. And she's like rolling her eyes, and she's like asking Martin if he's going to be okay. And he's like, if I have anything to do with it, yes, you are. And so, once again, the EMT's like, yeah, it's probably nothing. It's probably a broken bone. And right as he says that, Peter's blood pressure gets drastically bad, and he goes into shock. And everybody's panicking, and Dr. Best is like, I'm going to have to perform surgery back here. He's bleeding out. So, immediately you can see that he's panicked because he has blood phobia, but he immediately conquers it in a way, because he doesn't stop. He immediately starts cutting on Peter to release the bleeding, stop the bleeding. And as he's doing it, he's like, I may vomit. And Louisa's like, oh, that's okay. Here's a paper bag. She's just trying to help, but they're all panicking. And he goes to do the procedure, and the hemostat, or whatever the clamp thing was, ends up breaking. And it's the only one. So immediately Martin's like, I'm going to have to hold the bleeding myself. This will buy us time. So as he's doing that, he is like trying not to throw up or pass out, and you have Louisa calming him down, and she's like, Martin, breathe, Martin, breathe, Martin, breathe. Look at me. And so that was really helpful. She's trying to coach him through it, and he doesn't throw up or pass out, which is a good thing. And they get Peter to the hospital, and Peter is told that as he's going in the ER that he's going to be okay by the doctors of the hospital. So immediately you can tell that Martin's very beaten up himself and is very upset. He goes, and Louisa's like, Martin, what you did was incredible. And he's like, no, I know. I should have seen this sooner. If he wouldn't have been being the boy that's cried wolf the past few weeks, I would have caught on to his symptoms faster. It's all my fault. And Louisa's trying to comfort him, and she's like, no, what you did was incredible. Through all the chaos, you were able to find out and know what his situation was, and despite the EMT being an idiot, you still was able to do. And Martin's like beating himself up. He's like, what kind of doctor am I with this blood phobia? I'm not a doctor. And she's like, blood phobia, no phobia. What you did, Martin, was incredible, and I witnessed it. You didn't hesitate one bit. It was just I just loved that scene between the two of them. And then for once, Martin grabs Louisa and kisses her. And this moment, I was like, finally, he's showing how he feels towards her. And then you see Sheriff Mark walking out, and he's on the phone, and he's calling Martin, and he's leaving a voicemail saying he doesn't know if he is there yet, but that he's gotten the Kloof sister to the hospital. And as he's talking on the phone, he sees Louisa and Martin making out. And immediately you can tell that it's kind of hurting Mark. I think he's in shock that his best bud is kissing his ex-fiance / girlfriend. And he immediately is like, I'll call you back. I'll call you back, buddy. And hangs up the phone and just walks back into the hospital. And I'm like, I was worried about this one, like, coming soon, where Mark is going to realize, Sheriff Mark is going to see that Dr. Bess, Martin, and Louisa have a thing for one another, and how is he going to react. So that was that. So after the scene, you have Martin and Louisa, Dr. Bess, walking in the town while he's walking Louisa back to her house. And apparently they had been at the hospital all night because, Louisa's talking about how crazy it has been the last 24 hours. Possible arsenic poisoning turns into a splenectomy. And I'm just glad that, in a way, this has happened because it was fate, I think. And she's talking about how they ended up kissing, and she found it romantic that it happened this way. And then Martin kind of stops in his tracks, and she wants him to come in, but he says he can't come in because it's late. Well, it's actually early morning. We've been at the hospital all night. He's like making excuses, and she's like, well, I don't know. Like, she wants him to come in. And then he says something, and it kind of struck me, and I'm like, no, what are you saying? Don't say this. He says, we were both riding the adrenaline of the moment, but I'm happy to pretend it never happened, if that's what you want. And she's like, no, what are you talking about? Pretend it never happened. And he's like, yeah, we can shake this off. It's no big deal. I know you wouldn't want to do this. He basically is saying he knows that it's too good to be true, that she loves him, and he understands if they don't want to continue making things serious, that they can pretend it never happened and just be friends. And she's like, in shock that he just said that. And I'm like, no, what are you saying? Don't say that. You really have feelings for her. And I was like, so sad that he said that. And she's like, well, and she kind of closes the door, and he says goodnight, and she slams it. And you can tell that he regrets saying it, but he doesn't know how to feel. And even as we're going back to the doctor's office, and you see the scene of him reading the newspaper, and it has her picture in it, you can tell that he regrets that he said that. He has feelings for her. And I'm just like, I can't believe he said that. You kissed her! She kissed you first at the Blueberry Festival, but then you kissed her. I'm like, why? I guess it just gotta draw on the suspense. But then we go to the funeral. And we have the funeral going on, and Greg is talking about Agnes's life, and then it says that Aunt Sarah needs to be the one that is the one asked to finish the talk, the eulogy. And Aunt Sarah puts her foot down and she's like, no, I'm not doing it. And Greg is like, come on. And even Martin's like, he says, you're making a spectacle of yourself. And Aunt Sarah says, you have no idea how I can make a spectacle of myself. Which I thought that was funny, typical Aunt Sarah. And so Elaine steps up and is like, I can say something. I can read one of Agnes's poems. I have her poetry book, and everybody's like not wanting to. And the fact even Greg said I could perform, and George is like, please don't. So the sister wants Elaine to read a poem out of the book, and that was a heartfelt, touching moment. This last scene right here. You have Elaine reading one of the poems, and I gotta admit, this poem she's reading is better than the poem she was reading the last time. It was just very beautiful, and it was about nature, and when she concluded it, the birds started chirping. And I just thought that was just a beautiful moment, and other things were happening in that scene. You had, as she's reading it was about life's adventures, pretty much. You have Martin, Dr. Best, and Louisa looking at one another. You had Greg and George getting emotional. You had Sheriff Mark getting emotional. It just was a beautiful moment. And then what made it even more beautiful is when Elaine was done, George and Greg was saying how she did so well, and Elaine says, I think I know what I want to do in my life. And they said, what's that? She says, I think I want to go to New York and go to drama school. I'm an actor. I'm an actress. And they said, yes, you are. And I just thought that was a beautiful moment, just a good way to end the show. Besides, we did have another scene where we do see that Aunt Sarah and Dr. Bess Martin are looking at the birds one last time, and Aunt Sarah says, this is really beautiful, isn't it? And he's like, yeah. And he's still thinking about Louisa, because she makes the comment, somebody's grumpy this morning. And she's like, are you worried about Peter Cronk? And he's like, no, Peter will be fine. He can live without a spleen. It's no big deal. But he doesn't tell her the real reason. And she's like, I'm a little beaten up about myself too. I said some things I wish I wouldn't have said. I was very rude and mean to say what I said about the Kloof sisters. And she's like, I kind of regret saying what I said, and even putting the dirt in their cornbread. And Martin looked, and she's like, I'm joking, joking. And, and this quote I had to write down really hit me. At the end of the show, Aunt Sarah says to Martin, you just remember, whatever is going on, everything passes, just like the birds overhead. And that quote really stuck with me. It's a quote that I think I want to get printed out and put on my wall, because it sometimes in life you can go through things, and at that moment you think that it's the end of the world. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but you can be going through things in life, and it can hit you so hard that you don't know really how to react, and don't know how to get through things. But that quote just really stuck with me. And then it wouldn't be a little humor without Martin saying at the end, I hope they don't poop on me. So you had a heartfelt moment at the end, and you had this funny little saying at the end, a little remark. But overall, this episode was heartwarming. Was indeed a dramedy, and I really enjoyed it. And like I said at the beginning, I feel like as a Best Medicine fan, this was one of the best episodes. So yeah, that was a recap. So now let's me talk about my thoughts of this episode. So first of all, one thing I kind of missed about this episode is that we didn't get to see all of the characters of Port Wynn as much. I thought with this being a annual bird watching episode, it sounds like they go bird watching every year, more of the town would be involved. Yes, there was more of the town at the funeral, but I don't know. I miss seeing some of the characters. I miss seeing Geneva. I miss seeing Bert. I miss seeing Al. But other than that, I still enjoyed the episode. I loved seeing the Martin and Louisa character relationship develop more and more. I was hoping he would express his feelings towards her, and he does end up kissing her, but then ends up backing down because of what he said to her. But I guess we gotta keep that dramatic climb happening. I enjoyed seeing, it was funny seeing Sheriff Mark and Martin, Dr. Best hanging out and having their talks, whether, Sheriff Mark's a goofy character, but it's still nice to see that. I'm growing to like him. Aunt Sarah's character always cracks me up just the way she is. It was just funny to hear. I did not expect Aunt Sarah to be annoyed by these sisters, but, it is what it is. And it was just so funny. And Elaine, the fact that Elaine is really thinking about what she wants to do with her future and thinking about what Vanessa said is really kind of making me happy that she really is thinking about what she wants to do with her life. And it makes me wonder, will she really leave to go to drama school, or will Al talk her out of it? I'm curious to see about that. And then the Peter Kronk thing, I always enjoy seeing Peter Kronk, but this episode did really scare me because the preview of showing that somebody may have died and there was an ambulance involved, I was really scared that maybe Peter was going to get killed off. But I'm so happy that that was not the case. But yeah, that is my thoughts for the episode. I do want to say I'm very sad that we do not get an episode next week. They are taking a break before coming back to finish their final 3 episodes of season 1, so it does make me upset. We will have to wait a week, but not to worry, I may film a mid-season recap video next week. I'm not sure, so you can stay tuned for that. But yeah, other than that, I really enjoyed this week's episode, and I can't wait to react to the final 3 episodes. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to give me a like, subscribe if you'd like, leave a comments down below, and if you want to not miss out on me posting these videos each and every week, please turn that notification bell on. It'll let you know the second I upload my reaction videos, which is usually every Thursday, sometimes Fridays. But yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed this video and enjoyed the episode as much as I did. And this is the part now where I say goodbye to my Best Medicine fellow fans, and I get into talking about it with my Doc Martin fans. So if you've not seen Doc Martin yet, you may not want to watch this part of the video. So thank you again for watching, and I will see you next week. Take care. Alright, if you made it to this part of the video, it means you are a huge Doc Martin fan. You are a huge Doc Martin fan like myself, and you are watching both Best Medicine and Doc Martin. So if you're curious what my thoughts are about comparing the two, come on, let's talk about it. So this week's episode, as I told my Best Medicine fellow fans, I have mixed emotions. As a Best Medicine fan, this was one of the best episodes I think they've made. No pun intended. But as a Doc Martin fan, I have mixed emotions because I feel like this episode was a little bit too much like the first episode, as of events happening the same in a way as Doc Martin, where I could catch on right away and know what was going to happen. And what I'm talking about is the main plot line at the end of Peter Kronk's emergency in the ambulance was so identical to Doc Martin, if not to the T in a way. So I was very disappointed, and as watching this with my parents who have never seen Doc Martin whatsoever, I was having to hold it together and not say a word because I knew what was going to happen. And that's kind of annoying because I was enjoying the past few episodes not knowing what was going to happen. Like, there was little things here and there that you could catch on to, but not like knowing the immediate outcome. So that was a little disappointing for me, but other than that, I loved this episode. So there were a few things here and there that you could correlate besides that to Doc Martin. One of the things I picked up on right away is the blood phobia still to this day. You have Dr. Martin Best practicing taking blood from Elaine, the receptionist, but it's not going to plan. He still freezes up. And it just reminds me, as Dr. Martin Elliam and Doc Martin is taking blood from the patients. You know, he has to kind of look away. He can't see it. And that's what it reminded me of. Both of them trying to work through these blood phobias. Right away, when you met Agnes, the Kloof sisters, Agnes and Maleficent, I think is her name. I can't remember how to pronounce it. They were giving me the sister vibes on Doc Martin. The episode where the sister is very sick, but the other sister is a pharmacist or chemist, and she's doing experiments in the basement, which is what's causing her sister to get very ill and sick, and she's not giving her medicine. I was getting vibes from them. I thought these two sisters were going to be like that, but turns out no, this was more like the episode in Doc Martin where, remember the episode where Aunt Ruth is getting her hubcap stolen by the neighbor's son? And she goes to confront, and she meets the neighbor, the mom of the son, and she doesn't seem like she's okay, and she thinks that her son's poisoning her, and there was a whole thing, and then even it turns out that it was the wallpaper, and it was that was the same scenario. It was in Best Medicine, the sisters' wallpaper of their house, because they had a water leak, was causing them to get delusional and stuff. Now, thank goodness in Doc Martin, the lady didn't end up dying. Like, there wasn't a scare of her falling off a cliff. But, yeah, but the cliff part is significant to Doc Martin, because in Doc Martin, the final episode, the Christmas special of season 2 of Doc Martin, which, when I didn't have the DVD sets, I had no clue this episode existed until going back and watching a second time and third time finding this episode, because it's not included on the free subscriptions when watching. This episode the Christmas special was about bird watching, and you know, Bert was trying to get a profit by giving bird tours, and you had this guy trying to steal bird eggs, and he ends up falling to make money, and he ends up falling off the cliff, and Dr. Elliam had to perform an emergency craniotomy or something, because he was bleeding, his head was bleeding or something. I just remember him having to go out rescue him over the cliff. But in Best Medicine, unfortunately, as they're going bird watching, this Agnes woman thinks she can fly, and she falls off the cliff and ends up dying, which is more tragic than Doc Martin. So that was two parallels, the bird watching aspect. I found that the Peter Cronk storyline was similar. Obviously, the whole spleen ends up bursting, and emergency surgery is needed in the ambulance. Both Martins have to overcome their blood phobias to save Peter from bleeding out. In Doc Martin, Peter Cronk gets the injury because he doesn't want to participate in his PE class, but Louisa tells him he has to participate in the gym class, and he has these kids bullying him, and they end up pushing him, and he falls, and he kind of hurts his side. And you know, there was a whole thing where at that moment Martin was mad at Louisa for whatever reason. I can't remember the details, and so he kind of brushed Peter off, and then it turned out to be something serious, and then he had to perform the emergency reversal, so the spleniectomy or whatever, in the ambulance. And that was just the same thing in Best Medicine, except Peter didn't fall. He didn't erupt his spleen and rupture his he didn't rupture his spleen until he got pushed by the Kloof lady when she didn't want to get in the police car with Sheriff Mark. So, different scenarios of how he got the injury, but still same outcome. And it was like the same script, kind of, because Martin was saying the same things in Best Medicine or Dr. Best was saying the same things in Best Medicine as Dr. Martin Elliam was saying, about the the hemostat breaking and how he may throw up because of his blood phobia. It was just kind of similar, which I kind of predicted as I'm watching. And then the Louisa and Martin scene at the end where she's comforting him after he's performed the life-saving procedure for Peter Kronk. In Best Medicine it was a little bit more because Martin's really beating himself up over what had just happened. He was saying if he wouldn't have blew Peter off because of him coming in every week thinking he has these far-fetched symptoms and diseases, he would have paid more attention. And Louise is like, no, what you did was incredible. And even him saying, what kind of doctor am I with a blood phobia? Whereas in Doc Martin, same thing. Like Louisa was praising Martin for saving Peter, but Martin was like, he wasn't the type of person that wanted to be bragged on or whatever. He just kind of was like, that's my job. But they both end up kissing in both Best Medicine and Doc Martin, as we see. And in series 1, that is the final episode of Doc Martin, and we see that Martin says something dumb, as he does. He asks Louisa if she has a regular oral hygiene, that her breath stinks. And when he does, she kicks him out of the taxi, and that's the end of series 1, episode 6, the final episode of Doc Martin of the first series. In Best Medicine, he doesn't say anything dumb right away, but when he is escorting her back or walking her back to her house and she invites him to come in, he tells her that he understands that if she wants to forget that the kiss happened, that they were had an adrenaline rush when it happened, it was one of those moments, and that he understands if she doesn't want to continue being with him. So he wasn't as drastically insulting as Martin Elliam was, but he still said something that I think he will end up regretting saying. But yeah, that was that. Also, the scene where Elaine finally realizes at the end of the funeral in Best Medicine that she thinks she knows what she wants to do with her life. She wants to apply to go to drama school in New York. Kind of reminded me in series 2 of Doc Martin when Pauline tells Al that she wants to go to college, and that was a whole thing. I think that was series 2. It was the end of that Christmas special. Al had messed up because he didn't mail in her scholarship thing or her application, and that was a whole thing, the college application. So I'm curious to see in Best Medicine if maybe Al is the same in a way where he tries to talk Elaine out of leaving Port Wynne, but we will see. And then what else was in common? Oh, the Sheriff Mark and Dr. Martin Best scene of them in the woods, the dynamic duo kind of way talking, just reminds me of when you always had Dr. Best and Penhale, Joe Penhale doing things together. It always made their days, but the Martins would never admit that they really needed them and were best buds. They just needed them to help them with the situation. And then lastly, the pharmacist on Best Medicine, Sally Milo, is kind of reminding me of Mrs. Tischel, Sally Tischel and Doc Martin, the way she's carrying on and flirting with Dr. Best and Martin Elliam. But I think that Sally Tischel is a little bit more crazier and funnier than Sally Milo, I gotta say. I've always been a Mrs. Tischel fan. But yeah, and then backing up to the sisters, the Maleficent sister, the way she tells Dr. Best that, she knew he would come for her, reminded me of series 5, the episode where Mrs. Tischel takes James Henry and goes in the castle. And this is the episode where Martin really truly confesses his love towards Louisa. The way Mrs. Tischel's like, you came for me, Martin, you came for me. That's what that reminded me of. But yeah, I think I've covered all of the parallels to what they have in common. I hope I did anyway. I try to figure, what is in common. But sometimes I forget things. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the parallels. And like I said, as a Doc Martin fan watching this week's episode, I was a little disappointed that I was able to predict what was going to happen, just the knowledge of it. But it didn't make me not want to watch the episode again, so to speak, because it was a really good episode. It was a good development of Martin Louise's character. I just overall enjoyed it, despite knowing the whole Peter Kronk scenario, how it was going to go down. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and like I said at the beginning of my video, at the Best Medicine segment part, I'm sad that there's not going to be an episode of Best Medicine next week. They're taking a gap week, before a little break before concluding with the final 3 episodes of season 1, but I am thinking about making a video of doing a little mid-season recap. We will see. But for now, I hope everybody enjoyed this video. Please remember to leave a like, comment if you'd like, subscribe, turn that post notification bell on so you can get reminded every time I upload a new reaction video. If you want to check out my playlist, I have that on my channel as well, where I've accumulated all of the reaction videos so far, 1 through 9, and we'll add 10 later on, so you can watch that. But other than that, hope everybody enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next week if we make another reaction video, but if not, I hope to see you the following week when we react to episode 11. But I hope everybody has an amazing week and rest of the day, and I will see you guys with another reaction video of Best Medicine very soon. Take care.